Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. When it comes to the world of arcade beat-em-ups, there is no doubt that the Simpsons Arcade Game would manage to successfully stand tall and proud as one of the most memorable arcade hits of the generation. This classic title from Konami delivered an amazing 4-player brawler experience that victoriously not only has managed to stand the test of time in terms of quality, but managed to capture the spirit of the groundbreaking television show too. Sadly, we shall not be covering this astounding game today, but instead another title that would shamelessly try to capitalise off this game's legacy and nostalgia. That's right, in 2009 they would make another beat-em-up that would carry the Simpsons Arcade name. And when we bear in mind that most people aren't even aware that this abomination happened, you can quickly begin to build a picture that this was not particularly pretty. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the horrible delisted Simpsons Arcade sequel. Yeah! Before we delve into this questionable game, let's briefly discuss how life got to this point in the first place. Starting out as a short recurring animated segments on the Fox Network's comedy and variety showcase, The Tracey Ullman Show, hosted by our own British comedy trailblazer, Tracey Ullman, The Simpsons would quickly become one of the most popular segments on the whole show after their debut appearance on episode 3 of the very first season. Initially only making bi-weekly appearances, with the Simpsons shorts alternating weekly with other shorts, the dysfunctional family would prove to be such a hit with audiences that the decision was made to promote them to weekly status after 7 extremely well received appearances over season 1. Matt Groening's Simpsons shorts had become by far the most talked about part of the Tracey Ullman Show, and after regular appearances throughout season 2 and 3, it had become fairly apparent that the quirky little yellow family had completely outgrown the show that introduced them to the world. The decision was made by Fox executives to give the Simpsons their own dedicated weekly half-hour sitcom-style animated show. How very cunning of the Fox executives. I should clarify, these are human executives that work for the Fox network, and not literal foxes chilling about in boardrooms wearing fancy suits and pointing at pie charts. The decision to extend the animated shorts into a dedicated show was seen as a pretty ballsy one back in 1989, as not only was there little evidence to support the idea that a show of this nature would, or even could succeed, Matt Groening's somewhat subverted depiction of the classic American family was also a fairly controversial and forward-thinking one, particularly by the standards of the ultra-conservative America of late 1989 that had only gotten out of the divisive Reagan administration recently. Not only were Fox taking a massive punt marketing an animated show to adults and teens as opposed to exclusively children, they were also potentially putting out a beacon for controversy, shining a light on the less talked about aspects of life in Middle America that many wanted to remain untalked about. The Simpsons was counterculture, progressive, subversive, and a massive gamble for the Fox network and their cunning Foxy executives. As we all now know, this supposed massive gamble proved to be one of the most successful examples of a risky business decision in the history of risky business decisions, as The Simpsons didn't just become a success or exceed expectations, it became a worldwide phenomenon, the likes of which had seldom been seen previously, and has barely been seen since. It's an all but guarantee that every single person watching this video will at the very least be aware of The Simpsons and the main characters. In fact, it would be pretty damn surprising if there were many of you at all that hadn't seen at least an episode. I might even have a sneaky suspicion that a pretty large number of you actually know all the words to Mr. Plow off by heart too. There aren't many television shows in history that have that kind of reach. The great thing about The Simpsons though is the fact that they achieved all of their success on their own merits, and without having to compromise any of what made the show great in the first place. In fact, those subversive and potentially controversial elements were cranked into overdrive after the first couple of seasons, with absolutely anybody and everybody being ripe for parody. The incredibly talented team of writers behind the show had almost reckless abandon when it came to who they would target, and the unbelievable, almost immeasurable popularity of their work meant that they could be pretty much fearless. The Simpsons adeptly combined the classic family sitcom with dangerously sharp satire, constant but never annoying social commentary, and genuinely touching, heartwarming moments. This was a recipe for some of the most groundbreaking, pioneering, and downright hilarious television to ever broadcast, and it was also consistent as hell. Matt Groening's fictional suburban family and all the residents of Springfield had reached a kind of cult and legendary status rarely seen in any field of entertainment, and were now as recognisable with the likes of Mickey Mouse, Michael Jackson, and Hulk Hogan, brother. It's quite amazing that a show has reached those kinds of levels of success, whilst also being counterculture, having a conscience, and managing to tastefully shine a light on countless amounts of social and political issues that would have gone otherwise undiscussed. The Simpsons was far more than just a TV show. It was a huge franchise, an institution, and a license to print money. Just like any other huge and profitable franchise, The Simpsons just had to have a slew of licensed video games come out to capitalise on its popularity, and there were no shortage of Springfield-inspired ones released throughout the show's early years. The most fondly remembered, and almost certainly the best of these early titles, was actually The Simpsons Arcade Game, the 1991 hit produced by Konami. This is highlighted in my intro as one of the most beloved side-scrolling brawlers of all time. Konami's 4-player classic was highly revered by both fans and critics of the era, and went on to become one of the top 3 selling arcade machines of 1991. The brightly coloured beat-em-up would be succeeded by countless home console, home computer and handheld Simpsons or Simpsons spin-off games throughout the early 90s right the way through to the early 2000s, and it wasn't until after the release of 2003's fondly remembered GTA clone, The Simpsons Hit and Run, that things finally started to slow down on the Simpsons game front. Hit and Run would be the last game to feature any Simpsons related shenanigans before the rights to the franchise were purchased by EA in 2005. Considering Electronic Arts aren't exactly the most progressive or forward thinking of companies, in fact most people think they're a bit bloody evil, it was seen as something of an odd partnership, and a few worried Millhouse style eyebrows were raised when news broke that they would exclusively be handling any and all Simpsons games going forward. It seems that those fears were somewhat laid to rest, however, after the release of 2007's imaginatively titled The Simpsons Game came to 7th generation consoles as well as PS2, PSP and Nintendo DS ports. Only receiving mixed to average reviews, it wasn't exactly lighting the game world on fire with its unrivaled brilliance, but it did successfully capture the feel of the show and was very authentic representation of what one would expect a virtual Springfield to be like. The title, The Simpsons Game, was chosen as developers at EA wanted the game to represent a complete restart and reboot of the entire Simpsons gaming franchise, and I think it's fair to say they did a pretty successful job of that. This seemed to lay the groundwork for what would surely be an inevitable line of Simpsons game sequels, expanding on the not too insignificant successes of the 2007 title. Things actually looked quite promising, and fans were somewhat optimistic for the video game future of our favourite Springfield inhabitants under the watchful eye of their EA overlords. This optimism would prove to be entirely unwarranted, however, as the smart folks over at Electronic Arts made the puzzling decision to abandon plans for any future home console games, and instead focused their attention entirely on the mobile gaming market. Yuck. Their first mobile game, released in late 2007, was an isometric adventure, Minutes to Meltdown, developed by G5 Entertainment, and only overseen and published by EA Mobile. And this was followed by a sequel with similar aesthetics, Itchy and Scratchy Land, released 2 years later in 2009. This would be followed again by the cunningly named Simpsons Arcade, later that same year. As attentive viewers who have the mental capacity to remember as far as a few minutes ago will recall, this is not the first game to bear the name The Simpsons Arcade. However, this is not a port or even an updated version of the Konami arcade cab, rather a whole new title loosely inspired by the classic brawler. The plot, if you can call it that, sees Mr. Burns entrust his loyal lackey, Smithers, with a USB drive containing the plans for some sort of evil secret mission or other. Smithers inexplicably decides to encase this USB drive within a pink frosted donut before absent-mindedly walking out into the street and bumping into our favourite bald oaf protagonist, Homer, causing the donut to fly into the air and into Homer's possession. When several Men in Black style agents attack Homer and get the doughy treat back off him, Mayor Quimby arrives and whisks the tasty snack away from him, as he escapes in the limousine. Our pal Homer surmises that any donut that causes that much trouble must be worth eating, and sets out on a mission to retrieve it so he can shove it into his ever-expanding belly. The game is very clearly directly inspired by the Konami classic, and although level layout and in-game assets are totally different, it's all very reminiscent of the 1991 coin-op, and very familiar feeling in places. Unlike the Konami effort, however, the Simpsons Arcade 2009 game is a single-player experience, with Homer as the sole selectable character that players can choose, with other family members and Springfield residents popping up with assists that come in the form of collectible power-ups, or as enemies and NPCs. I don't know about you, but to beat them up with only the choice of one character as opposed to 4 is automatically a step backwards in my mind, and instantly raises the question as to why this bloody game was named The Simpsons Arcade in the first place. When firstly, not only is there no way of playing as the Simpsons family, but this isn't a bloody arcade game either, unless you mean taking your mobile phone down the arcade and playing this nonsense. Could EA not have just been a little bit more honest about their titling? This game should have been called Homer Mobile, not Simpsons Arcade. We had a Simpsons Arcade game, and we got to play as the Simpsons in an arcade. Gameplay is your standard punch jump and button bashing type affair, only with a few twists and the obvious and unfortunate absence of any actual physical buttons to actually, well, physically bash. You know, like you would actually get with an arcade cabinet. Homer has a punch attack which turns into a combo when repeatedly pressed, and a belly flop floor attack which causes all nearby enemies to fall to the ground, which then leaves them susceptible to Homer's earthquake or Yokozuna style seated butt attack manoeuvre. And what a manoeuvre, as Vince McMahon would say. Homer has a health bar and 3 sweet precious lives at his disposal, but he can also pick up various food related health items or short term melee weapons to help him along the way, such as a giant mallet and a projectile nuclear power rod, which is an obvious homage to the glowing green rod in the iconic intro to the animated series, so at least there are some nice references here and there. If Sector 7G's finest has all his health depleted, players are tasked with a rather gimmicky chore of repeatedly swiping their grubby little fat fingers across the screen to simulate slapping Homer's face and waking him up. This is actually quite a nice little touch at first, but does become quite tedious for your chubby little Cheeto dust covered mitts rather quickly. In addition to the standard belt scrolling beat 'em up levels and boss battles, there are also auto scrolling levels where Homer is constantly forced towards the right of the screen, almost like a side scrolling shooter. The 2 minigames from the original Konami arcade game, Balloon Pump and Face Slap, both make welcomed rebooted returns and maintain the same look and gameplay elements from their arcade counterpart, as well as new minigames that make use of the iPhone's motion technology and see players tilt the device to direct Homer's movement. Homer's little Steve Jobs funded adventure sees him traverse many familiar locations from the beloved TV show, such as downtown Springfield, Channel 6 Studios, Krusty Land, and of course the nuclear power plant. Amongst the bosses that Homer will have to beat the snot out of to progress are Bumblebee Man, Chief Wiggum, that squeaky voiced spotty teen, who is apparently called Jeremy Friedman, Kent Brockman, Krusty the Clown, and a rich Texan, otherwise known by his alias as Shady Bird Johnson. So there is a nice varied and not too predictable cast of characters on display, so it's not all disappointing. If players are SMART enough to make it to the end of the game, they will have to do battle with Smithers before a final confrontation with a mech suit wearing Mr. Burns, in another homage to the Konami original. All in all, the game will probably take you around an hour and a half to complete, which is probably pretty standard and expected for this type of simplistic arcade experience. Reviews for The Simpsons Arcade were fairly mixed, but also probably slightly better than one would expect. Most critics gave the game a fairly muted response, but Slide to Play awarded it 4 out of 4, and GameStop ended up giving it 8.5 out of 10. with praise being given to the colourful graphics, the variation in minigames and level design, as well as its closeness to the source material. Unfortunately, the intervening 13 years haven't been particularly kind to it either, as it hasn't stood the test of time very well, despite there being many positives with the game. To be fair, it doesn't really bloody matter, as the thing is completely delisted, with very little chance of it ever being re-released again, so you have a job trying to actually play it today anyway. Apple really don't give a bloody crap about game preservation in the slightest. The issue with the Simpsons Arcade, and quite frankly the entire Simpsons franchise from around 2009 onwards, isn't so much the quality of the product, it's what it represents. And as pained as I am to admit it, The Simpsons has become a cynical, soulless corporate entity that bears little resemblance to and is a shoddy version of the incendiary, thoughtful and progressive show that preceded it. I'm not going to claim that mobile games have zero merit, as that would be ridiculous, but this mobile game certainly represents what the franchise has become. Basically an easy way for soulless men in suits to make easy money by capitalising off the license's past major successes, rather than actually attempting to make the best innovative product possible. The fact that the Simpsons games have been exclusively mobile based for over 13 years at the time of making this video is not indicative of anything positive as far as our beloved Springfield residents are concerned. It's been sad to see the downturn in quality of what many people consider to be the greatest television show of all time, to the point where it has become a literal shell of its former self, still churning out episode after episode, season after season, but devoid of the soul, heart and undeniable wit that brought its success in the first place. Most of the newer episodes aren't really that terrible, they tend to be a little tedious at worst and kinda mediocre at best, but when compared to the genius of say, season 3 to 10, it's night and day. An embarrassing downturn when you compare old and new. In many ways, this mobile game that carried the Simpsons Arcade branding was every bit as faithful to the TV show in terms of both accuracy and quality. The difference though between achieving this in 1991 and more modern times is that such a feat is no longer anything to be proud of. To put it simply, this so-called Simpsons Arcade game is just like the modern TV show, no more than an empty husk of its former self functioning as nothing other than an ugly, transparent corporate cash grab. Modern Simpsons and the Simpsons mobile games are not counterculture, but the very culture we should be doing everything possible to try and counter. The Simpsons represents soulless, money-orientated corporate monotony, where creativity dies in favour of lining greedy shareholders' pockets and pandering to advertisers. You won't see any boundaries pushed or risks taken with this franchise anymore. Feck the Simpsons, feck this game. I would not hold my breath in regards to a Simpsons return to form, as things have been rough for well over a decade now, and the sooner this brand is put out to pasture, the better. While being beyond redemption by this point, there was clearly a time period where The Simpsons was the best thing since sliced bread, and in many ways it's gutting that such a time frame was so long ago now. So why not share your memories of The Simpsons Golden Age and let me know some of your favourite memories regarding this now historic brand. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts about America's once favourite dysfunctional family and the direction they've taken more recently. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. But without further ado, this brings today's upload to an end. So if you enjoyed this video, a couple of years ago I uploaded a video providing coverage on the good Simpsons Arcade Game, so why not check that one out next? If you are new here, do not forget to like, comment and subscribe, as I have already made videos looking at most of the greatest beat-em-ups in history, which is partly why we are now on to covering bizarre mobile stuff like this. Due to the somewhat obtuse nature of what I do, not all of my videos are particularly searchable, so it really helps me out when my audience are kind enough to back my work on Patreon. Every dollar helps, and if you become a patron, you get to see these videos before anyone else. Speaking of the cream of a crop, my small Patreon following, special shoutouts go out to A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heo Paula Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Corey Imar Sr., Ron Dinched, Evan Baller, Philip Manth, Azra Rakai, Dropkin Varela, Michael Calix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Johnny Holly, August Piazza, Justin Wang, Capcom vs SNK, Hermes Gonzalez, Man Shovel, Michael Hall, Sang Hee, Norma Stitz, Langston Miller, Noob, Sarah Powell, Vlamik Renee, Marvin Araliga, TOG Driver, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Bauer, Chris Fisk, Risk67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Synth Spaces, Punk Toast, and everybody else who backs my work over on the Patreon platform. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. You're helping stop this show ever becoming like modern Simpsons. Yeah!